In this lesson, we'll continue looking at custom hooks. Because we've spent so much time creating abstractions out of the greeting component made with hooks, we've thinned it out to a really small component. But I want to spend a little time showing the kinds of abstractions that we are able to do in class components that should hopefully give us a way of comparing the two and seeing a more clearer comparison of those two approaches. What we did before with the hooks component was abstract away all of the stuff that has to do with setting the title of the application. And I want to try and do that here within the class component. What we use in classes world to achieve something similar to the custom hook is something called a RenderProp. There are various ways to approach this, which are slightly different, but the idea behind them is pretty similar. You just create a component that takes in a prop, and that prop is going to render out some component. So what I'll do is create a new class, say export class. I'll call it document title. Now, as usual, it extends component from React, and inside it'll have a render method. We'll see what goes in there a little later. But for now, we want to start pulling out things from it that we will need. Because this stuff to do with the document title is spread across component did mount and component did update, I'm going to create a component did mount and component did update method. So component did mount and component did update. Essentially, the way you want to think about this is we want to just duplicate the things that we did here and take them out so that they can be or reused by multiple components. So we need to pull out our logic. We'll get this from component did mount. And then we will get the same thing from component did update. Now, similar to what we did with the custom hook, this does not need to take in the name and surname because we're making it more generic. So I'll just say this takes in a title. And this title is going to come from props. Now, similar thing is happening here. My component currently doesn't know of such a prop. So I'll just make a declaration there. I will eventually pull this out, but so that we don't have a name clash, I'll just call this props2. And it takes in a title of type string. It will also take in a set title function, which takes in a new title of type string and returns void. Right? I need to tell my component about those props. Oops. Now I can get set title as well from this. Our components coming together, right? The last thing that we need to do is add the render prop. Okay, so this is just a prop like any other prop. The only difference being that it's going to take in this case, it's not going to take in anything. And it will render, it will return a JSX element. And inside of our render function, what we'll do is get that render prop from props. And just call it return render. Now, inside of our component, we can remove all of the logic to do with setting the document title. So this can go, this can go as well, meaning these two can go, and meaning we don't need the component did update. And how we use that is that we go into our component tree and wrap our component in it, the same way that we keep wrapping things. So I can go in there and say document title, the component we just created. It will take a title prop, which we build together using a template string, takes in the name and the surname. We also need a set title prop, which takes in the set title. We need to get set title from the props. So set title equal to this dot props. And finally, it has a render prop. And inside of render is a function that returns to us some JSX. So it takes nothing and returns all of this. And there we go. Now, if I change this, hopefully, if everything was right, it should change the document title. And it does. And so we have created this document title component, which can be reused outside of this component. So we can pull it out of here. And I'll create a folder and call it RenderProps. Inside, I'll create a document title. Put that in there. We need to also get the props. Now I can rename these props. And we need to get the imports. Then everything should be fine. Now we go back to our component. It no longer knows what document title is. So we need to import that. Let me just come in here. Import document title from RenderProps document title. Okay, and we should be back. If I edit, it still works. So that is our first abstraction, which is RenderProps. And the second thing that we need to abstract is the width. Just like how we abstracted the width in the previous lesson about custom hooks. Another pattern that exists in classes to abstract out stateful logic is something that is called higher order components. And that's what we're going to use here to abstract out the logic to do with the document width. So I will create a new function, call it width window width. So with window width, we'll take in a component. I'll just call it wrapped component. And it will return to us a class. We'll just make it an anonymous class. extends component, and of course our classes always need that render method. Now we need to start moving the logic from our component into that class that is returned. So just to save us time, I am going to copy these and put them in our class. And our render should return to us the wrapped component, but provide the props that were passed to it. So this dot props, spread those props across the rendered component. And also, because we're doing this to get the width, it should also provide the width. Now, width currently doesn't exist. I will copy the state, add it there, but remove the values that we don't need. And so in my render, I need to get the width from the state. And of course, I need to close out my wrapped component. I have a TypeScript error over there. We need to specify what the type of wrapped component is. It's a React component type. And that is pretty much how you create a higher order component. Let me just take a moment to add the TypeScript annotations. And how we use that is that we wrap our greeting component with the higher order component. And if we go back up to the higher order component, you'll see that it provides to whatever component is wrapped an additional prop, which is the width. Because of that, we can then destructure the width from the props and we no longer need the width from state over there. We can actually remove all of the things that we've taken out into the higher order component. So all of this, and everything should still work as expected. I'm going to refresh there. And if I change, the name updates. The name updates. If I change the width, my width subscriptions still work as expected. So now, just like I did with all of the other abstractions, I'm going to pull out all of this code that relates to the higher order component into its own file. Paste that in there, get all of the imports that we need, export this, and there's one more thing. Export that. And we can get back in here and import all of the things that we need to import, including the higher order component itself. With that done, everything should work the way that we expect it to. I'll refresh that. We can change that, and our width subscriptions still work. So we have successfully abstracted all of the logic out of the class the same way that we did for the hooks component. And so we're at a point where we can make our comparison again to see if there's anything we can compare and learn. Now, looking at the class, both the ways that we used to abstract away things, that is by creating a component that takes a render prop and by creating a higher order component, both those ways need to wrap our component tree even further. So if you think about it, the way our component started was just this card over here. That's what this greeting component is about. But in order for us to give it this additional logic, we've had to wrap it with the theme context consumer. We've needed to wrap it with the document title render prop. We've needed to wrap it again with window width higher order component. And if we compare this with the hooks world, in order to achieve the same thing with the same kind of abstraction, we just created additional hooks. And like I explained before, they come with this natural language type way that we can use to understand what's going on. And if you look at our original component tree, it still looks the same. We're still rendering just the card. It's not wrapped in anything. We're using our custom hooks to get all of the things that we need to provide to that card in order to get it to where it has the functionality that it needs. I hope this makes a good enough comparison to show you the value that we can get from using hooks instead of using render props and higher order component, and how it thins out the component, does not lead to us wrapping our component tree with multiple things just to provide values, and provides this nice and easy language to help us read what is going on in the component. I don't want to stretch this lesson too much, so I'll stop it here. As usual, the link to the repository is in the description. If you go to the repository, you'll see that each lesson is its own branch, and within that branch there is a start and an end commit so that you can follow along easily. Let's meet in the next lesson.